think you've got all the slides and stuff, so if you want to, how are we doing for time? We're ready to start right now?
We already have it. Yes.
Okay, we'll start it.
Let's start it. Do you need more?
I'll get it while because you're going to do the first one, right? If people could sit down, we're going to get started.
Should I get started?
Yep.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And we are the last session before the Bits and Bytes. So multiple interface, we are meeting here again in Buenos Aires. So first of all, it's a noteware. We are IETF meeting, so you have to be follow the rule of the IETF. The next one is logistic. Okay, so first of all, we need a JavaScribe. Thank you, Michael. Second, we need a minute taker. Anybody can help to take a minute? Yeah. Anybody can help?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So today is first of all is agent bashing. So we are going to discuss 5 items. So can you read the agenda? Is there any agent bashing here?
Any agenda feedback?
Okay, thank you. So let's get started. So first of all is our current working group document status. We have one working group draft. I made one mistake. I forgot to submit to ISG. But we did just before our session. So this draft is a happy eyeball. We submit to the ISG for publication. The second draft is a MPVD ID draft. So this draft is still waiting for the clarification on how identifier will be used. So we are still waiting for the clarification. And third one is about the NTP support. And so this draft will be presented later today. So any comment or feedback here?
So, question about the clarification of how ID will be used. So, is that waiting from a clarification from the working group or from the poor authors?
Yeah.
At the last meeting, the authors said, they thought they should wait, or at least I think it was Suresh was presenting, but I can't promise, that he should wait until we get a little more clarification on how it would be used in order to understand how to resolve the issues with the draft.
Good.
All right, so the next one, you want to do that?
So we just want to notify the working group of IPR on a document that was presented here last time. There is an IPR disclosure from Microsoft on draft Klein MIF MPVD API recs. The terms are reasonable and non-discriminatory license to all implementers with possible royalty/fee, otherwise known as RAND. This is not a working group work item, so we're just informing the working group so you can consider this if and when we decide to discuss adopting this work. So there's not really much to discuss at this point, just making sure the working group is aware of the IPR disclosure.
Yeah, so we have lots of IPR claim in this working group, but it seems like we do not have comment anyway. So next one is the recharter discussion. And first of all, we are going to give some guidance about our discussions here. Is the so you can see today we are not so many people sitting here compared with the last time. So we are observing this. Some of our key contributors are not here in this meeting. So if you have any opinion about this discussion, please post to the mailing list. In addition to raising your comments in the meeting this afternoon. And so we are not going to make a final decision until everybody, and here or somewhere else, has his chance to express his opinion or her opinion on this topic. I mean, it means we are not going to make a final decision today. Again.
I mean, we never make consensus decisions in the room that aren't, they have to be finalized on the list. They can't be finalized here. Chartering decisions are not consensus decisions of the working group. They're actually made ultimately by the area director, but usually we have discussion of them in the group. But today, any conclusions we reach in this room, we have to respect the fact that some of the most the biggest contributors and the outspoken people in the group aren't here. So we're not gonna, we want to talk about this. We're gonna listen to what they have to say about it on the list before we make a decision. So we basically have three options for what to do with this group. This can be said of almost any group. We can recharter it, we can go on hiatus, or we can close the group. In this particular case, we don't always think about whether we should put a group on hiatus. In this particular group, we've been thinking about that, and the chairs were talking to the AD about that as a possibility, because we came out with the MPVD architecture, and since then, we've had a lot of trouble as a group reaching consensus on what to, how these further documents, right? And part of that reason is that we're just starting to see people, or at least I think part of the reason is that we're just starting to see people implement MPVDs in their operating system. So we're trying to do things like write a abstract API before anybody has written any concrete APIs and before we have any experience with them. So in this group, we're thinking, would it make sense to put it on hiatus? Do we think we'll learn more and want to come back? Do we just want to close it? Or do we want to finish the work that's going to be in the charter text that we're going to show in the next two slides? But comments?
Yep, Michael Abramson. I don't know what hiatus means in IETF terms.
When you put a working group on hiatus, it stays an open working group in the sense that it has a charter. Its charter usually says that it's on hiatus, and it doesn't have any work items with dates. And its mailing list stays open so people can discuss the topic if they want to, and it doesn't meet at IETF meetings. And usually what you do is you set a date for reevaluating whether to bring the group back or close it. So we might say, well, we'll get back together. I mean, it wouldn't be necessarily that the group would meet, but the AD and the chairs might check back in a year to see if we think the group should be closed. And that might depend on whether there's ongoing discussion on the list or any feeling that it's valuable for it to stay open.
And there was a question. Oh, you're actually sitting there. Perhaps you should say it yourself.
Dave would just like you to speak for him.
I'd asked on the Jabber room. On the agenda slide, you showed Joni's presentation before the recharter discussion. I didn't know if there was an agenda bash or what, so.
Oh, yeah, we did. I'm sorry, we just messed that up a little bit. But let's have this discussion and then we'll go to that, because
okay.
We'll limit the length of this discussion since we can't conclude anything from it anyway, I guess. Or do you want to go to the other one first? Okay, well, think about this one, and I guess we can go back to the, I mean, it's a little bit, I don't know if we really want to, well, anyway, let's go back to the presentation on NDP support, Joni's presentation. The other two presentations at the end are only going to happen if time allows, but we'll probably cut the conversation in order to have them. But why don't you come up and do yours, and then we can go back to this.
All right, so this is going to be a short update, but we actually have done some updates to the draft. Hopefully someone actually read it. So Next slide. Next one. So what was done is that there was a bunch of comments and critics and whatever feedback on the draft, and we tried to address them, still kind of keeping the even part of the original design in. So I think I captured all of those, but let's see. So originally the NDP options were designed so that this PVD container had the kind of start and the end thing, 2 different options, and the last one was the one who carried the PVD ID. And the reason for this that we also used to have the solicitation part of the PVD. And now that we also went and removed the solicitation for PVD, we don't really need a separate PVD option anymore. So we collapsed the PVD ID into the actual PVD container and then got rid of the PVD solicitations. And once we did that, the only place we actually can see any of these PVD options is the array. Then there was a very good comment about the embedded security that we had, is that what if you don't understand the used hash keys and a signature method, but you still want to use the content of the container and just skip the security, then you're not kind of able to jump over the hashes and signatures. So for that purpose, we actually added the length of the hash and the signature. So now that you can actually parse the packet, even if you don't understand what is the used hash algorithm and so on. And once we then have the kind of length of the hash and the signature, that also implicitly serves as a sign whether you apply the security or not. So we get rid of this S flag that was previously used for kind of indicating whether we have a security in place or not. And the other thing is like we took away the kind of, like typically in many of these IDs, the options are arranged so that it looks nice on paper. So you have a kind of empty page to align stuff nicely. So we took that away. So there's no neat alignment inside the option anymore. It saves you a few bytes. Okay, next slide. Coming back to the size consideration, yes, you can bloat arrays if you want, especially if you have the security in place. But you need to understand that we are not carrying any certificates in there, and also how we refer to the certificates is kind of taking the hash of the actual keys, and that hash we are carrying inside the packet. And then how to weight this whole thing is kind of, because it's a container option, so you contain other ND options inside it. So in order to kind of populate the implicit PVD and also the explicit PVD, you end up duplicating some of the ND options like PIO and MTU and stuff like that. So it kind of asks for a sensibility and to be conservative what you actually want to signal in an array. So if you put a lot of information, if you put multiple PVDs, obviously you are going to blow the array. But if you just use 1 or 2 PVDs and the very essential options like a PIO, then the size stays like a considerable.
Tim Chan, were you going to say more about size, or is that the only slide on size?
Sorry?
Is there any more on size considerations, or is that the only slide?
No.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, sorry. So my question is, given how big do you expect these to get? You're saying they can grow because we can't fragment an RA. Is that going to be a concern?
I think that you cannot fragment that anymore. There was a 6-man document that kind of took that away.
So,
There's something going on with the microphone there, Yuni. I don't know if you can talk a little closer to it or.
so you can't fragment the router advertisement. Is that something that's worth documenting here? You can, if you're using the DHC method, you can. The DHCP v6 guard allows for fragmented DHCP responses, but you can't fragment an RA. So there may be situations where you're kind of encouraged to use DHCP because you can't get what you want in an RA. Maybe you should document that somewhere.
Well, I think I refer to thing that you cannot fragment anymore. I think I put that in there.
Okay, I had a quick look through for size and maximum length and stuff and couldn't see it. I'll check again, sorry.
Yeah, if those numbers are missing, I'm happy to put those in.
Dave Taylor. So I'm going to tie this slide back to the MPVD ID discussion that Margaret covered. So 2 questions. The first one is, Margaret mentioned that the MPVD ID was blocked on clarifications on understanding how it would be used. Now, given that this one takes normative reference and the other one, is this actually sufficient to answer that question is the first question. The second question is an example of how it does clarify. I don't know whether it's sufficient, was my first question. How the example of how it does clarify is the be conservative what to advertise in RAs, right? Space. You know, very small things are important when putting in an RA, as you pointed out, right? In the MPVD ID document right now, it allows at least 6 different types of MPVD IDs, including, you know, a UTF-8 string, an FQDN, and things that can be really long, in addition to ones that can be really short.
I think that one thing you should know is that it's theoretically possible to have one of these without putting an ID in it. I know it references that document for when it does put an ID in it. But I mean, if we got rid of IDs, you could still document MPVD specific stuff like without having a name. Like the DNS lookup document doesn't actually end up with a PVD name necessarily, right? Like whether it has an ID or not is something we're unclear on.
I think Joni wants to respond.
So the because so I wasn't in the last meeting. I had something to do with the green card that kind of blocked my movement. So anyway, the thing is that I and the rest of the authors, we were quite confused what to do with the PVD ID document. So we did nothing.
Well, except for this one in the container option, it has a mandatory PVD ID field.
I know.
So you can't do this without that, is my point. Yeah. You can't do explicit PVDs with this without that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe we're rethinking that based on the discussion at the last meeting, is that, you know, if we did the DNS lookup approach that was proposed at the last meeting, you could look up based on your IP address and you'd never end up having a PVD ID at all. And does it need an explicit name? And there was just unresolved discussion of that at the last meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I'm just going off of what's in the current draft.
Yes.
This current draft, you know, 03 or whatever it is the one that says that it's mandatory.
So again, if we go that approach, so the again, I was very confused about how this whole thing came about, this multiple exchanges and things. So even it's a kind of, how would I say, lame reason, but I kind of would like to see this also work without DNS infrastructure to be around. Like it's because I can forward a packet and configure my addresses with IPv6 without having DNS around or DHCP around. So I kind of don't want to rely that the method that is doing would actually require an additional infrastructure to be there around. So yes, so the PVD ID document that this one references because it's going to use the PVD IDs, and we didn't update the other one because we didn't know what to do. But as far as I understood, it would be okay, kind of, to update the PVD ID to kind of wipe all the NAIs and realms away and just put, for example, UUID there or something else, and be fine. It would be kind of conservative about its size, what the PVD ID is. So I just want to know what the working group wants to do with the PVD ID.
For what it's worth, I think that would be a fine answer.
Okay, Tim Sharon again. So I just had a quick scan through the draft as is. The word fragment is not in there. So I think it'd be worth capturing somewhere that RAs can't be fragmented. DHCP responses can be. It's not mentioned in the architecture draft where it mentions you can use either method to convey them. But I think it's worth conveying that somehow in the document, just for the guidance of A, helping people understand why they have to be conservative, and B, if they want to be less conservative, use DHCP.
Yeah, so yeah, happy to add that there. Okay. Oh, all right, next slide. The ASCII graphic, nothing there, it's just changed. And the you need to have the PVD identity in there, and so this document just refers to the other one, so nothing specific there. So next slide. Next one. So the kind of thing that at minimum, what you can do with the PVD container option is that you signal the PVD ID. So you can send this option without having any other ND options in, so it doesn't really configure anything, it just tells you the PVD ID. And this was kind of reflected the discussion that was going on the mailing list at some point, that do we need to actually standardize a new option to carry the PVD ID that you can do this multiple phase lookup? So anyway, so you can use this option also to do the same thing. And then the okay, it's a bit wasteful way of doing that. Instead of one bit, for example, in the header, but the you still have the provision of having, if you for some reason want to have other ND options carried in your PVD, you are able to do that. So the question is something more or less needed. I got one point already, so clarifying the fragmentation even further. So anything else, and then the other one is related to the document. So I'm basically now in a situation that what else?
Ian Farrer. I've been having some conversations with one of the six-man chairs across the course of this week about, well, some things related to RAs and some other things that we've been thinking about that may need extensions to RAs. I'm seeing a lot of reticence, shall we say, in doing anything with changing RAs at the moment. So the question is, has this already been discussed with anyone in six-man?
So we haven't brought this to six-man for one reason, and is that the at least my feeling is that the MIF working group hasn't really stabilized what it wants.
It's a reasonable point.
So
yeah,
the good thing about having this kind of container option that you actually are not changing the router advertisements at all, just yet another option. So we can, in that sense, leave the six-man to handle their arrays as they are.
So, I mean, this is one of, well, two of the current options on the table that would require at least some modification or a new option type or some modification in RAs in one way or another.
What is the other one?
So within the DNS draft, there is a very small, it defines a new bit in there, doesn't it? The S bit.
Yeah, but you would then change the array, right?
Sorry?
You would then modify arrays.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, either of those changes, if whether it be a new container option or whether it be the addition of an S bit or anything else.
We tried that earlier and got the typical six-man response.
So, sorry?
So we tried that before and got the typical six-man response. Get out of my lawn.
Right, the S bit they didn't want. Okay, but the general way forward with this is to work out what we're doing and then push it to them once we've decided.
Yeah, but then I don't need any sense why we would spend any more cycles like trying to do what MIF does. So, because, you know, if you can do that with one bit, and if that magically allows you to do the configuration without additional signaling, then it's fine. But then we don't need to do anything here, basically.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating either of these. I'm just saying that, you know, from the discussions I've had with six-man chairs this week, it's going to be a consideration.
Yeah. But honestly, I'm just kind of trying also to get the feedback, because the updating the documents for fun is not fun, kind of, you know.
I agree.
Yeah.
Michael Abrams. So I think there is a use case for having a PVD that non-PVD aware devices don't see, and they don't use it to configure themselves. So whatever method we come up with that does this configuration, there needs to be some kind of discriminator to say that, okay, these other devices, they're not going to see this method. And I've been talking to the six-man chairs and so on, and like if ND and RAs are like locked down, then we need some other method to convey this information. And I've been talking to people, I've been getting, you know, DNS-SD could be one vessel, and you could use part of the, you could put stuff in there. You could do it in ND and actually have specifically, like, when you see a default right, you actually do unicast ND to something.
And I could also use HTTP.
Yes, you could do that as well. So, but it's like, I think that, and I don't know, and then all of a sudden you're duplicating the RA functionality using some other mechanism. That's not good either. There is absolutely no consensus on where to go. And I think this is part of the problem that we're facing here, is that there is no obvious best way of doing this. And I don't know really how, and I guess that comes to the rechartering discussion and what we should do about this working group. I wrote to the list earlier that I had some ideas. I need to write those down. I'll hope I can do that in the next few weeks, to see, is there, you know, can I formulate that in text that's easier for people to understand than my random ramblings. So, okay, done.
All right, I think I'm done for this one. So for the working group, please give some indication of the direction with the PVD ID. That would be nice. And the also the kind of clear indication, like a would be like if this is not going to progress, then please tell it as soon as possible. So that's also the other way.
So Dave Taylor, two other comments. That one I think is minor and editorial was, when I read this version of the document, I was initially trying to read it as if I hadn't read other documents, right? I was initially confused about what the behavior would be if you had if you had an option that was both in an explicit PVD and a container option, as well as appeared outside that. And I got to what I thought was the end of the document. I said, it didn't answer that question. And then I scrolled down and found the answer in the appendix in the example section. And so moving that up and treating it more explicitly would help, I think, the reader. Okay. And part of the answer to that question, I think, is not in this document. It's more like in the architecture document, is how you deal with getting stuff from both explicit and implicit and so on. And so maybe mentioning that issue and giving pointers to where the discussion is would make the document a little bit more accessible. So I think that's easy to fix just editorially.
Yeah. For the latter part, I think that minutes and everything in last meeting said explicit that don't define the host behavior. So I took everything that even sounded like host behavior away.
I'm saying the information that's in the example section is sort of what I was looking for, but I initially stopped looking for that when I was doing this reread too, because I got none of the references section and didn't notice there was an appendix until after I started typing it. Oh, I guess I can't type that up. Okay. Yep. So that one I think is easy to address. I think the bigger question is the one that Kel was mentioning, which is what's the way that 6-man would accept this, right? Would they accept it as a container option, or would they say, well, no, let's just create another neighbor discovery option that's not router or an RA, it's a RA, it's a PVD RA or something that has the same type of format, or what? Because then you could have multiple messages instead of saying, well, I can't fragment and I have to pack them onto the same message. I don't know, but that is a reason why maybe this discussion should move to 6-man sooner than later. Yeah,
and I'm happy to do that, but this group has to kind of then be behind what we are presenting there on behalf of, Okay.
Okay. So I guess we will go back to the charter discussion. We talked about the options. One thing that could go along with either closing a group or putting it in hiatus, by the way, is sending some work to other places. So if people have thought about that, they could bring that up. Obviously, the other places, it would have to be in scope for them, and they'd have to want it and have consensus it was a good idea and all that. But let's go through what recharter text we have. The original idea here was to update it so that it was an accurate reflection of what we're currently doing. So that's what this recharter text is. It says the purpose of the group is to define how hosts should behave in the presence of multiple concurrent network connections. And we talk about how that can be multiple physical links, virtual links, or even one link with 2 points of connection. Nodes attached to multiple networks may encounter problems, and we reference the problem statement, RFC 6418. The multiple interfaces working group defined an architectural concept of a provisioning domain, and then we reference RFC 7556, and then we talk about how PVDs may be either implicit or explicit, and then go down. And then we say the MIF working group is focused on 3 remaining items: determining how explicit PVDs will be configured, determining how hosts can discover more information about a PVD to which it is attached. This might include the PVD ID, connectivity characteristics, costs, whatever. Determining the requirements for an MPVD API, and defining an abstract MPVD API, which will allow applications and middleware to determine and manipulate information about local PVDs. And then there's a final paragraph that says we may also provide advice to operating system developers or application developers on how to provide improved connectivity experience when a host is attached to multiple networks, or when there's a change in the set of networks that a host is attached to. That's stuff like happy eyeballs, which we've already pretty much finished. So it's not on the list of what we'd be rechartering to do, because that's already in the ISG, but we might have future work along those lines. So that is the charter we had come up with. And I guess it would be good to have a general discussion now about what people think we should do.
Ian Farrer. Point 2 is interesting. It says determining how hosts can discover more information, and then goes on to say this might include what it might discover. The two things don't sort of seem to gel together to me.
Oh, so you think I should just, I mean, grammatically it should say.
I think it is
more information.
Point 1 is about how,
such as
how they're going to do, and then point 2 is about what.
So yeah, okay. We'll have to do a grammatical edit there. I agree.
Michael Abrams, just to be clear, so we are going to work here on also what?
I'm sorry.
So did the properties, are we doing that here? If we're accepting this, was that the intention? Okay, so it says we should determine how, but it doesn't say explicitly here that we should determine what.
Now, this needs to be reworked, because it includes, it's intended to include work where we would go and get this information about PVDs, and we'd know what information we could go and get. So clearly there's like a sentence missing here or something.
Oh, okay. So, but
Before we wordsmith the charter, though, I think maybe we should have a discussion of whether we should have one. Does everyone in the room think we should keep having one?
Yes, I do anyway.
Tim Chan, I think if we're trying to encourage people to come to the group with things that are relevant to what we'd like to see, to stop us just fading away, it makes sense to have something that defines what that is. And I think part 3 there is of particular interest. Without an API, then a lot of it can't be exploited as we probably like to see it exploited. So I think that's the next thing. I know we've got a couple of personal drafts in that space, but I think number 3 is something we can be reasonably active with, I would like to see.
Ted Lemon. So HomeNet is quite likely going to be asking MIF to produce something or document something or review something. And it would be nice if there were a working group here to do that. Of course, that obviously requires that the working group actually want to do that. And so perhaps your question is whether there's enthusiasm for doing work. But it seems like there's at least a few people here who are saying there is.
Michael Abrahamson again. So the DMM we're presenting in 6-man, a cost option. I think that's one of the things here that I think we should own the property space in this working group, my opinion. So I think that if we decide that we should, it's about how and what should be discovered, the properties and the mechanism how to discover it. I fully support that, and I think that should be done here.
Okay, so I could say determine how hosts can discover more information about a PVD to which it is attached and what information it can discover, period. This might include, that would be grammatically correct. That would fix your problem too, Ian, right?
Just missing that clause. Tommy Polly Apple. Yeah, I agree with that.
And
Yes.
what information?
I think that while there is confusion about how what's the best way to translate this information around, the fundamental problem that we're getting at is still very important. And I've heard it mentioned in several other working groups of, oh yeah, this is a MIF problem. Let's have MIF solve this. For example, one that's just coming up, I know, like the captive portals, BOF/working group. That's a very interesting space. We have a lot of energy there. And their question right now that's open is, okay, let's define our protocol document for how we discover the property of this network. And they're like, well, what layer do we do it at? We could do it at layer 2. It's the exact same problem that we're dealing with. How do I get these? If we don't have this group here, we may just have a divergence of everyone's kind of doing it a different way. And that seems like information that if we had a solution, we should have the same solution between captive portals and here.
Michael Abrahamson again. Yeah, I think it would be. I think that there is a belief that the properties are being worked on here, and we should invite people to bring those properties here so we can get that part worked out. Because that's one of the things that I still haven't even begun to grasp exactly what these properties are. And you end up in a lot of discussions about what should they be and how should you characterize this and who to trust. And I think that should be worked. Either that's a separate working group that is chartered to do that, or it's us. But I think someone needs to be in charge of that work.
Yeah, you think there needs to be a home for that, like one home? Yeah.
Yes.
Sri Gundavali Cisco. I slightly have a different view. I think the properties that are getting defined in DMM or other working groups are specific to that working group. So there is a context and there is a domain. So those properties are in that context. I don't believe, I believe that specific working group should define that. While this group may have started the work and may have provided some basic, semantics, etc., but the actual definition is the domain expertise. It doesn't belong here at MIF.
Tim Chan, so going back to the captive portal thing, I did make that comment in when they had the BOF maybe a year ago. And I think some of them were listening. But the point there is you might have multiple domains there, some of which are captive, some not, when you're looking at all the different networks you could join. But equally, there might just be one. So are we, in terms of a host discovering about the qualities of the domain it's attaching to. Do we want to become one or more interfaces, one or more, or are we focused on two? I think it's what we're doing here is applicable if there's just one, and you might choose to use it or not.
I mean, one of the most sort of annoying, difficult captive portal cases is where you have LTE and Wi-Fi on a captive portal.
Yeah, that's a good example as well.
Ian Farah, there's a question to Sri's point about where the responsibility for defining the particular prefix properties. I think I agree with him in terms of what the actual properties should be, but I think MIF should have the responsibility for defining the framework, the format in which those properties exist. If we get into a situation where everyone comes up with their own set of semantics for this, then we haven't got a chance.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Me too. So, yeah.
So Dave Taylor, I'm going to read two sentences out of the RFC that we did, which was the MIF architecture document, because I'm going to ask whether the working group still believes these sentences. Because right now my guess is we don't, but I'll read them and we'll see. Says DHCP-v6 and RAs are the two most common methods of configuring hosts. To support the architecture described in this document, these protocols would need to be extended to convey explicit PVD information.
Yeah, I think that we kind of started to not be sure we believed that when Lorenzo and Eric showed up and yelled at us that we shouldn't do both, we needed to do only one, and we never could agree which one, okay? And then we got the IPR claim against the DHCP one, and we said, well, that makes it easier. We'll do the RA one, but we're not going to get to define an RA option without 6-man's buy-in, if not actually sending it to them to do there. And we're pretty sure they're going to say no. So what do we do now?
Yeah. That's why I'm wondering if we believe that there's a tractable problem that will actually make it through the IETF, or a tractable solution that will actually make it through the IETF, because I don't know.
I don't know either.
Michael Abrams, so as written, I think we already said no, because we already said that the DHCP was out of scope, and putting it all in RAs, they're probably not. Yeah. So I think the answer to that is no.
Not that this will necessarily work, and maybe it's already been rejected, and I was just too tired to think about it or hear it. But this is Ted Lemon, by the way. But one could have an RA per PVD as opposed to a PVD option, and just have a PVD ID in the RA, and that might actually solve the space problem, because then you don't really have a big issue.
It's also possible that we could do a rewrite of the DHCP draft to take out the ID and see if the same IPR claim is made against it. Because the IPR claim is if you read it, it's about putting an identifier in there that defines a management domain. And I don't know that we need an identifier. I used to think we needed an identifier, but I began to think that there doesn't need to be any global identifier in order for these things to be useful, if you can get the properties.
Dave Taylor, Ted's question was equivalent to what I said before about there being a new option, because RAs are defined such as you couldn't do that. You'd have to create a new option that's not RAs or whatever. But my point is that that's a discussion that needs to happen on 6-man. It's not something that MIF can decide, right? So that's what I meant by maybe this is actually the wrong place to have that part of the discussion. I think I had a comment to Margaret, but I forgot what it was about the, sure, the working group could have, 15 different DHCP variations of the document and see which one isn't the one that gets filed against, but I don't know if there's that. I don't know if there's energy in the working group to actually do such a thing.
I don't think we should do a blind search, because we do actually have the text of the piece of IPR we're violating.
Michael Abramson. So one way forward might be to send a requirement to 6-man to say, we have the need for non-PVD, for PVD-aware nodes only to configure themselves with network parameters. How? Tell us, please.
If we could get consensus to do that, that would be great. I mean, do you want to try to write up some text and see if we can get consensus to do that?
I'll write some text on that, and I don't know, there's sense of the room, perhaps?
Okay. I mean, do people think that would make sense? Anybody want to comment on whether or not they think that would make sense before we ask a sense of the room? I mean, we'll need some text to actually get consensus on, right? But Yoni, Ian, did you guys want to comment?
Ian Farrow, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they're going to be well, they are the gatekeepers of this, so it makes sense to involve them sooner rather than later.
I might be a bit slow or something, but so multiple groups have in past extended NDP by defining options, right? Has been perfectly fine.
Have other groups defined ND options?
Yes.
Who?
For example, the mobility groups have done that.
Yeah, but they got 6-man approval.
Yes, but did they ask in advance or first completed their work and then said that this is what we want you to bless? Kill it or be fine?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think that it usually goes like somebody comes up with something, and it, like with the DHCP, multiple groups draft new options, and then you go and check with the experts that it's actually okay. So I don't see the difference why we suddenly would need to work in the other way around.
So you're saying that we should wait until we have consensus on an ND draft and then take it to 6-man and ask them?
Yeah, for example, we would actually need to know what we want in advance before we go there and say, because then we basically restart everything. I'm just saying, so why don't we complete what we have, whether it's that one or the other one or whatever, we just know what we want to do and then go there, because it's kind of, I'm thinking like if we go there and say that, please tell us whether we can do something that we don't know how we are going to do it and what we are going to do, because we don't know what we actually want to convey and how we actually are going to get it. And whether it actually works without supporting infrastructure, but can you tell us how to do that? So I don't really find that as a convenient way forward.
Okay, Michael Abrahamson. So it's all about the approach. I mean, I go and talk informally to the chairs, feel them, you know, get the sense of how they're reasoning, and then I try to deduct, you know, course of action from that, which I think has a reasonable chance of succeeding instead of throwing papers at each other. I don't like that approach at all. Some people think that's a very valid approach, and in some cases it might be, because it actually means you have to hash out the idea properly, and it makes the recipient, you know, it's easier for them to understand. So perhaps we should do that. We should come up with a concrete proposal, and or at least a halfway, you know, say, does this seem reasonable or something like that. But I don't know. I don't think there is a wrong or right approach here. It's mostly, but I think we should definitely, you know. So I'll volunteer to write some text, and then let's see on the list if we can agree on that. But okay. We're going to get the sense of a room of having something, you know, having nodes. Send them information so that non-PVD aware nodes will not configure this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems we have right now is that we don't have consensus on what we would put in an ND option. Okay, so just throwing our lack of consensus over into a room full of more people who don't probably have any better consensus than we do about what should go into this option is unlikely to produce desirable results.
So I have a use case where I want non-PVD aware nodes not configure an address. That is a specific use case. Set-top box, I don't want them to use one of the prefixes I'm announcing to it. So that prefix, I can write up that use case, you know, in very, very quickly. So the question is, because that requires it. In order to keep doing this in RA, you need to make the information incompatible to non-PVD aware nodes. So we're already breaking RA if we're going down that path. So either we come up with a new way that duplicates RAs in some other fashion, basically, or the similar functionality, or we make incompatible RA options.
The current prevailing view, I can tell you, is that if you need to do per node configuration and not the same configuration to every node in a particular link, you should use DHCP. I assume you have a reason not to use DHCP, and I don't know what it is because I don't understand everything about your use case. But
Well, I want to put the PVD option in there in the DHCP so far, and well, okay.
Tommy Polyapple. I guess I was just going to agree with Michael that even if we just have some small bit of text, or even just showing them what we already have, even if we don't ask for a formal, please give us your full proposal, but just get a sense of their room. That would help perhaps influence the decision we make, because if we're having trouble coming to the consensus about how we're going to do this, at least even just a quick set of responses of, no, we will never approve this, or like, we think you're going the wrong direction, would help guide at least. And maybe it won't be worth anything, but it could be.
so send them, for instance, a pointer to the spec that we have now
Yeah.
and ask them if
Along
they
with
have
some
any
other text
thoughts.
about, right, just say,
So why don't you,
are we
Michael,
going in the
try
right
to-
direction or the wrong direction?
Try to write up something you think would make sense to send to them, and we'll take it to the list and see if anybody objects. I mean,
Right, and say this is not final. You don't spend a ton of time on this, but just give us your first pass.
yeah, we don't need like a huge formal thing to send a note to six-man, okay? So if, Michael, if you just want to send what you think the right text is to the list, we can, if people don't object, we can send it over there and see what happens. It probably should include a pointer to our current draft. Your text probably should include a pointer to our current draft, as, even if what you're going to say is you want some other features in it or something, just so that there's not any confusion about what happened to our current draft.
Yeah, sure. I'll write something, send it to the list, see if we can get agreement, and
Okay.
I like iterative, ways of working as well. So I'll
Yep.
do.
So, but trying to get back to the question of rechartering, okay? So I think we got a little bit of, basically all the feedback we've gotten at the mic is about what the charter should say or what we should do, but I don't have much of a sense of the room if, like, there are some people here who strongly prefer one of the other higher level choices. So why don't we try to do a little sense of the room on that, okay? So how many people, let's go to the three choices. How many people here think that with tuning as necessary to the exact text, that we should recharter something along the lines of the new charter that we have here in these slides? How many people think that? Hands up. Okay. How many people here think that it would be better if we went on hiatus, just put things on hold for a while until we get more implementation experience with PVDs to guide our work? 4, I think. And how many people think that we should close the group at this point? Okay. So one of the issues we've had with this group, we've had two issues with this group, I mean, maybe more. But one has been difficulty coming to consensus on things, okay? We just kind of loop on them, and until the authors get tired and fall over from exhaustion. We also have trouble with engagement. We put documents out, nobody writes back on the list, nobody reviews things. So part of like making a decision to continue to do this group, to continue to have this work, is some sense that people here are going to be engaged in that work. So of the people in the room, how many people in this room feel they are committed at this point, or willing to commit to working on these documents, reviewing these documents, providing feedback on the list, and actually doing this work? How many people are committed to spending time to do work in this working group? Okay. So we have 8 people who think we should recharter. We have 8 people who are committed to doing work that might or might not be the same people. We have nobody who thinks we should go on hiatus. And we had 4 people who think we should close the group? Two who thought we should go on hiatus. Was it 4?
4 for hiatus, 0 for closing.
0 for closing. Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure is that we got the counts right in the. So 8, 4, 0 for these 3 choices, and what? There were 2, and then 2 other people raised their hands.
8, 4, 0.
8, 4, 0, and then 8 people who said that they were willing to be committed to do work. Because the reason I want to have numbers is because we're going to ask the same question on the list, and we're going to ask people to speak up who we're not here, and it's very hard. I know we like hums and all, but it's very hard to compare a hum on a list to a hum in a room, okay? So, Dave?
So Dave Thaler, I'm not sure there's a huge difference between the last 2 options, and I say that sort of as a PCP working group chair. Where is that on hiatus or is that actually closed and we went through a phase? As long as the mailing list stays open and you're not meeting at an IETF, then I think the last 2 options are actually equivalent, having been in the chair position in this space.
Sure, Gundavali, that was my reading as well. That's how I take it. It's pretty much the same, almost pausing it. Just let's complete the work. Let's see, what we have and decide.
Yeah, I mean, presumably some people thought it was different because some people voted for one and not the other. So I don't know. But that's this is a decision that has to be made by our AD, presumably in consultation with the working group, which he's doing now, and with the working group chairs, which he's been doing. So it's not like this is going to be a consensus call. We're just trying to get feedback on people's opinion, and we're going to also ask people on the group to provide their opinion. So.
Right. No, I understand. If you re-ask the same question with just 2 options, I suspect, you'll see more votes for the second one.
Well, whatever. Okay. I don't know that it matters because it's not, I mean, Terry can interpret this however he chooses to interpret this, I think. So if he would like us to ask another question, he's not shy. So it's
I don't think you, sorry, Terry Manderson, responsible AD. I don't think you need to ask another question. I'm looking at this and there seems to be 3 key points here. The first is the intractable problem regarding the RA space. I know we're going to work on that and get an answer soon, but if it comes back negative, that's a bit of a blocking point. And so I have that in the back of my head and I'm concerned about that. The second is about the cycles that people have for this. We have 20 people in the room. I don't think that's indicative. I get that this is Buenos Aires and we didn't quite get the numbers to this IETF. However, we also have remote abilities, we have Jabber, and they're essentially empty for the people in the room. So that's a little bit concerning for me.
It is midnight where some of our key contributors are, 3 in the morning or something like that. So.
Look, I understand that, but we've got to keep this in mind that cycles are important. You not only need the people who are willing to work on the documents, you need the people who are willing to review the documents. You need the people who are willing to really put the effort in. The last one was, can't remember. One sec.
The last one of what?
I had 3 points. Okay, I had 3 points. The last one was experience in terms of what's actually out there and getting done with PVDs. Okay, some great work has been done, some important work has been done already, but I'm not so sure there's a strong community of people doing this actively out there. There may be some, but some is not a strong community. So those are the things that I'm going to be considering over the next few weeks. Happy to take feedback, happy to take emails direct to me or on the list.
So go ahead. But
So quick, Eric Vink, just to tell you there is a project, EU-funded project called NEAT, which includes PVD inside. It's open source.
yeah, I mean, one question I would like to ask in response, Terry said he's not sure who's out there working on anything related to PVDs. We'll also take this question to the list, all right? But if people in the room, who in this room is working with something right now that is related to PVDs, or or your company is? So, is anybody working on PVDs? A half a hand. So, you don't have to call it. I mean, some. And is anybody who's working on MIF technology or PVDs right now? So there are, looks like 5 people in the room, and we'll also take that to the list and see if there are more people that could not be here. I know there are at least a few more people who are not here.
Tommy Polly, Apple. I think to the point of getting more involvement and contribution, I'm fairly new to this group, although, coming from the mobile space, we certainly work with multiple interfaces all the time. I think some of the focus that I saw in like the earlier documents maybe weren't as attractive, if it's focusing on things that we feel like were already solved. But there is definitely a space of things that are not solved yet, like captive portal stuff, like knowing the properties of interfaces dealing with V6 subnets. I don't know if it seems like a fair amount of this is still quite abstract, and I'm not sure how much we can bring in the concrete details, but having very specific use cases like captive portal case, like what Michael's working on, and I'm not sure if that drives necessarily a document, but have extended discussion on the list about how do we solve this particular problem and bring in the people who have the use cases. I think that would bring in a lot more energy. I think people on our sides would be more willing to contribute and help work out these details if we knew, specifically what are the current use cases that we're trying to solve beyond just how do we deal with multiple interfaces in general.
Yeah, I mean, there are other use cases that bring this to mind, like, you have a VPN and your local network, and, people have talked about how do we get information about what stuff should go over the VPN, right? And it should maybe be only stuff that's to Nokia.com or something, or it should only be stuff that's these prefixes.
I think, so I come from a VPN background myself, and that's one case where I think the energy here is maybe less so, because a lot of VPN protocols, especially proprietary ones that have been done for SSL VPNs, have solved this problem for themselves because they have their own step of provisioning that when you connect the VPN, they just shove you a giant configuration. And, I'm involved in the IPsec group. I'm trying to add a configuration there to give you your split DNS domain names of which domains to send. And once you have that, you have pretty much everything you need to define your PVD. It's almost already there. Having, terminology to talk about that and make that more consistent is good. But on the VPN side, I think that's more of a solved problem. So maybe focusing on the ones that we just have no idea what to do with. Captive portal in our case comes to mind. Like, that might be more incentive for people to join in.
So can I ask you one clarification? I saw the multiple APN in the mobile network is not the case you are considering. APN,
yes.
I mean, multiple APN.
Yes, we deal with multiple APNs all the time.
You don't consider that use case?
I do consider that a use case, but I consider that a use case that I believe most mobile devices with multiple APNs have a solution for in practice right now. We have a way to handle it, and we could share best practices and stuff that we do to represent that information. But again, there's already a lot of in-place provisioning for multiple APNs. It's more of a solved problem. I think having it, if we define more of this PVD stuff, if we have more explicit PVDs that are negotiated with the network, folding those use cases of VPN and cellular APNs into that would be useful. But right now, they found a way to do it on their own. So they don't require this technology in order to function.
All right, we can talk off of that.
Terry Manderson, 80 again, or still. Tommy made a fair point. There could still be work here, and there's work that it sounds like you want to do. What I'd like to ask the working group to do is to look deep in and ask yourselves, does that work belong here? Does it belong in another working group? Does it actually belong in another area? So consider that over the next week or so.
Dave Taylor. So I did not raise my hand, and I'm not currently doing personally any work in this particular area, so I don't have a strong opinion between these. But in terms of the counting, I raised my hand multiple times because there's multiple options I would be okay with. I actually did sort of raise my hand on the closing my group one because I would be okay with that, because in my half a hand raised, it was if the important work actually moved to some other working group, like 6-man or whatever as we were talking about here, that's what I care about, is the important work gets done. To Terry's last point, I don't really care which group it's in per se, whether it's in this group or this one closes and it goes to some other group or it goes on hiatus or whatever. So that's why I didn't have a strong opinion, but I actually, in counting, I was half a hand on closing the group, but I voted.
If it didn't make it above your head, we can't see.
So I'm just saying that what I care about is the work, like Joni's document or whatever the replacement is, right? Which I think is the big question. If it's not that, then it's some other variation of it or whatever else. I think things like that is important work to do, but whether that gets done in 6-man or here, I don't really care. I just care that it that there becomes a solution. But I'm also not blocked on there being an answer either, because I agree that people are coming up with their own solutions, and you just have proprietary solutions today, or they're working with implicit PVDs today, and they have something that is good enough for most purposes. And could it be better? Absolutely, right? If we can get something that's better, that's great. But if not, the world will hobble along as it's been going.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my experience when groups have been closed, and I have been involved in that process, that part of the closing process is to take every working group item and figure out where it's going. Okay, because there was consensus to do it. We need to figure out who now owns it. And if nobody's going to own it, we need to determine that there's not consensus to actually do that work, right? Because we don't want to just drop work on the floor that there's actually consensus that the IETF should do. And so there's definitely a not usually trivial process that happens when you close a group.
Michael Abramson. So in the next few weeks, I hope there will be a draft published, which is implementation experience of doing this when involving Network Manager in Linux and doing this with namespaces and so on. And even though this is a solved problem in Android, most likely, this is not a solved problem in other parts of the Linux community, even though Android is running on a Linux kernel. And I don't know how much of this that has been published from Android with experience and so on, but I think that needs to be done. We have not, in that part, there is very little about the information. It's actually, okay, magically the application says, I want to be in this PVD. Okay, how does the operating system make that happen? That's what we primarily try to do, because the properties thing is kind of hard. Then I would like to echo that for me, it doesn't really matter exactly where the work is done, but everything in this charter suggestion, I want to work on, and I want it to be somewhere. And I think that if VPNs and all of it, they all come up with their own methods for provisioning routes and resolvers and search lists for different things. That's not good for anyone. Everybody's fumbling around and solving their specific problem, where we might have a generic mechanism that would very easily solve this for everybody. And from an operating point of view, I hope that Tommy here would agree with me that it's easier to do this with one mechanism than to have one where OpenVPN does one thing and something else that VPN does it a third way, and on the APN you do it the fifth way. I mean, yeah. One mechanism with one set of functionality would be better.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we should note is that while the ND option is V6 specific and could go to 6-man, right? It's not clear that everything we're doing here would be for V6 only. In fact, it's quite clear that it's not. We talked about would V4 and V6 be separate PVDs, et cetera. So things like the API, we can't necessarily just say toss everything over the wall to 6-man, because that's not a V6 specific thing.
Yeah.
So
I think in that case it's an implicit PVD based on the interface, because it's an MMS APN, or it's an internet APN, or it's something else APN, and you have the properties implicitly because you know the type of the interface, right?
That is true, although it does get a little bit more complex. Sorry, just to get into the details of that, because you can have multiple APNs sharing a single V4 address on a single V4 interface. So there's not a one-to-one mapping. And so there is explicit configuration involved.
Yeah, but they could be different PVDs because there's no one-to-one mapping
No, they
from
are, right.
PVDs to addresses
right,
either.
exactly, and we treat them such. But it's not all implicit, just based on the network. So yes, I agree very much with that we can totally get by if this work gets done elsewhere. Everyone will do it their own way. But it becomes very frustrating on the implementer side to have to deal with a different set of information from every source. And to some degree, it may not matter as much if the way we retrieve the information is consistent, because already we do have a way of retrieving information from a VPN. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do another round trip or another set of round trips to get that information. The problem arises more, I think, when you have the inconsistencies in the format and the vocabulary used, because the way DHCP configures your routes is not the same way that you push down routes from a VPN. And once we start adding other properties onto that, like we want to, like how expensive is this? What extra authentication do I need to do here? There really is no standard way of communicating those ideas. So maybe it would be even useful if what we did in MIF was just define what are those properties. I know it's a hard problem, but define what are the properties, what is the vocabulary we need to use, such that when we go in IKE, add the property there, go in ND, add the property there, we use the same format such that when it bubbles up eventually, we use that same property, and we can understand it without having to say, well, you said you are expensive, you say you are costly, but that's a different metric, and it gets very complicated.
Ian Farrar, in discussions that I have around the sort of whole MIF architecture, the PVT kind of functionality, I think people are fairly strong on the idea of provisioning protocols, how all of this stuff may or may not work. When you start to get to the information that's going to be provisioned, both our documents and the conversation gets extremely wavy hand. And I mean, maybe it would be a worthwhile thing in that case, to say, well, we have a kind of chicken and egg here. We've attacked it from the provisioning side and and protocol side and had limited success, but maybe trying to attack this from both sides might help us to get more of a handle on it.
So any other comments on the charter or anything? People who've said something at the mic that they think might be good to discuss on the list, please also send it to the list, because about half of us aren't here. I think we had at least twice as many people in the room last time. And I also know multiple of our document authors and like the people who get up and talk at the mic and write on the list are not here. So if we could try to continue this conversation on the list, that would be valuable. So Terry, any questions you want to have, comments you want to make before we move on to the other presentations? I'm good. Okay. Ted?
Hi, I'm Ted Lemon. So I wrote a document which I presented in HomeNet earlier this week, and I'm not going to go over the whole document because you'd all fall asleep, but I wanted to talk about a couple things that are in the document that are particularly related to MIF. And before I go into that, just to talk a little bit about, so if you look at an Android phone that's doing MIF, the reason it's able to do MIF is because it's able to come up with ad hoc provisioning domains per interface. And so it can do MIF that way. When you're in a HomeNet, you may be multi-homed, but the multiple homes aren't connected to the host, they're connected to the routing infrastructure, and so that's where this becomes more of an issue. And so a lot of the stuff that you would need to do in order to get PVD working in that context actually is harder. Next slide. So it's an assumption in the HomeNet architecture that HomeNets are MIF nets. I don't know if it's explicitly stated. I think it is actually, but it's very explicitly stated that HomeNets are multi-homed. And if you're multi-homed, then you are connected to more than one provisioning domain unless you happen to be getting both of your network links from the same ISP, which would be often not the best move because presumably you want backup. So what that means is that at any given HomeNet there are actually n+1 provisioning domains where n is the number of external links you have. Possibly more, but generally speaking, it's probably a good model to think of there being n+1. The +1, of course, is your HomeNet, which is its own provisioning domain, which is automatically provisioned, but nevertheless has some characteristics that are distinct from the outside world. You need to be able to look things up in the HomeNet, and that information is provided by the HomeNet, not by the outside world. Dave?
Dave Taylor. If you have both a guest LAN and a non-guest LAN in your home, are those two PVDs or are they one? Because I'm guessing it should actually be n+2 in that example.
In that case, I think that there are, you could say there are two different networks, each of which has n+1 PVDs, right? Because the guest network, you're not going to connect to both the guest network and
that is the false assumption.
Okay.
No device in the world could ever be connected to both at the same time, I think is probably overstated, given all the other things that MIF allows, right? Saying, well, that was never going to happen that's probably actually more likely to happen than some of the other things that MIF allows. So.
Fine, you just made my life harder. Thanks a lot.
Welcome to MIF.
Yeah. Yay. Okay, so, it's good to get these things worked out. So the other issue, in addition to what happens on the home, is that if you happen to have a device that wants to be on your HomeNet, it may want to be on your HomeNet when it's not at home. And if that's the case, then it has to get to the HomeNet somehow, and that HomeNet connection is its own provisioning domain, separate from the provisioning domain that you may be connected to. It's similar to a VPN. In fact, it may even be a VPN, but it's its own provisioning domain. So, and then, well, actually, I said this just a minute ago. That if you want to be able to figure out which PVD you're talking to, it's more complicated because you're not actually talking directly to the PVD. You have to talk to it through the proxy of the HomeNet. Next slide. So it turns out that there isn't any technology available currently that I'm aware of for querying multiple provisioning domains in an environment like a HomeNet. So I just came up with a hack in the HomeNet naming architecture, which solves the problem, and I think is actually maybe the best solution to the problem, maybe not. It's certainly, I think it would work, which is basically that every provisioning domain has its own name resolution resources. I think that's the big thing that's an issue. Of course, every provisioning domain also has its own prefix and probably maybe more than one prefix, but the big thing is that there needs to be some way to look up a domain name and in the DNS and know that it's that the lookup was done in a particular provisioning domain. And the way that the HomeNet naming architecture does that at present is that it advertises, at least I don't know how it's going to advertise if we don't have an ND option, but in principle it advertises an IP address for a resolver for each of the provisioning domains, possibly more than one IP address, but at least one IP address per provisioning domain, and they have to be distinct. We could solve this problem with EDNS 0 options. We'd have to write some standards to do that, and I'm not really sure that it's the best idea, but that's another way to do it. If the working group thinks that's a better plan, that would be fine for me. I'm curious to know what people think about that. And I guess that was the third bullet point that I just mumbled.
Michael Abramson.
Yes.
So you're talking about including the PVD ID in every query so that the resolver knows what...
Right, so your stub resolver then has to be PVD aware, which it does anyway, so it's just a matter of whether you'd rather do it as a wire format thing or whether you'd rather encode it in the IP address, and either would work.
Tim Chan, so do we think that HNCP can help with this in the HomeNet case? And at the moment, it says in the HNCP draft, it's not an RFC yet, it says that the network gets external information about its connectivity via DHCP PD or other options, It could get external information about its provisioning domains that way and then circulate it and things like DNS resolver addresses with HNCP.
But not to hosts.
But then, yeah, okay, but then you're configuring the routers based on what the routers learn from HNCP, and they fire out the wonderful RAs that we're going to.
Right, yeah, right. So in fact, you're correct. HNCP is how this information gets to the whole of the home net. But then once it gets to the home net infrastructure, the infrastructure has to communicate it to the host, and that's the issue that I'm talking about. I just kind of took it as read that it would get to the whole home net somehow. Eric?
Yeah, Eric, I agree with you. I think that querying all PVD and DNS server is the easiest way, specifically because if you go to a single resolver, how does it know the other PVD? If my resolver is 8.8.8.8, I'm pretty sure that Mountain View doesn't know my local provider, right?
Yeah. I should say, I didn't actually mention this explicitly, but it's kind of my assumption that the resolver, the caching resolver that you're talking to is in the home net. Because although you might have a host that's configured to talk to 8.8.8.8, the caching resolver in the home net will be able to, wow, my train of thought just left the station. Anyway, oh right, the issue is that if you suddenly become disconnected, you still want your queries to get answered. So it's nice to have a local IP address to use.
Michael Abrahamson again. Wouldn't you want separate resolver instances, one per PVD running on the router in case?
That's what I'm saying.
But if you're running a separate instance, it would have a separate address per PVD. So why would you need the DNS0 option?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, that's an implementation detail, right? I mean, it's entirely possible that you'll have one resolver that just listens on 3 IP addresses and uses the socket on which the query arrived to determine which PVD you wanted, or you could have 3 separate resolvers with 3 separate caches. If you have one resolver, it's still going to have 3 separate caches. It's just an implementation detail.
Yes, but why do you need the EDNS0 option? You can discern it by address. The DNS query comes into a certain.
What I'm saying is that I mean, I think you're just so in love with the solution that I think is the best solution that you don't even see the point of the other solution. But
I wouldn't put it past me.
But the point is that it could be argued that using 3 IP addresses for the same resolver, if you have one resolver, which you might, is overkill, and maybe it's the wrong way to solve the problem. And so I just wanted to put it to the working group. Does everybody think that's an okay idea? And it sounds like you think the EDNS0 option is a crazy idea, so that's fine.
I'm just trying to figure out why it's absolutely needed, because...
Well, it's not.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. No, it's an option.
Agreement. I agree that it can be solved like this, but it can be solved without it as well.
Okay, great. So do we have, I think that was my last slide. Yes, right. So there you have it. Oh, Dave.
Dave Taylor, I don't think it's crazy, but I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting your question correctly. Let's say you have the example that I gave where you have a home router. It has 2 LANs. It has a guest LAN and a regular LAN, and it's multi-home to 2 ISPs.
Yep.
Right. Saying in this example, it probably has, if it's actually multi-home to 2 ISPs, it probably has 4 IP addresses, 2 external ones and 2 internal ones. Okay. You're saying, based on our previous discussion, this router actually has 4 PVDs. Right. It has ISP1, ISP2, guest LAN, and owner LAN. Okay, those are set all the N+1 or N+2 that router actually has N+2 here, which in this case is 4. It has a DNS resolver that is listening on all 4 of those IP addresses, and which IP address it gets the one on tells you which PVD tells it, as if it's assuming that the router itself was running the recursive resolver on it, so that you can resolve names locally without passing it all the way up to the ISP's one, right? And so it's just listening on those 4 and debuxing, saying whichever of those 4 IP addresses I get, I'm going to use that as the PVD lookup inside my resolver, right? That's what you're saying, correct? If so, I'm saying, yes, I think that's reasonable. It's a bit odd that, it will seem a bit odd to some people that the address of the DNS server you're giving out is the router's public IP address on some ISP, but if it works, it works, so.
Doesn't even have a battery?
You can use this one.
Oh, here we go.
Can you check out?
That sounds like it works. Okay. Yeah. So no, I'm not saying that the. I apologize. I'm actually a little bit stunned from the amount of lack of sleep that I've had or something, and so I'm not necessarily parsing questions correctly. The IP address that's given out might well not be an external IP address. It might be an internal IP address or multiple internal IP addresses. Life is strange.
Right. I understand there's multiple ways to do it. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that if the router did not want to have to mint any new IP addresses, it could do what I described. If it wanted to mint new ones and say, on my LAN interface, I'll have 4 IP
Yeah.
addresses there, you can do that too.
The problem with that is that you probably want to use 3 ULA IP addresses, because otherwise, when you start querying PVD after the connection to the ISP goes away, then presumably that address might no longer be valid. And of course, you're going to stop advertising that PVD, so in principle you shouldn't be getting queries. But on a practical level, it probably is easier if until that information, that stale information expires, the packets do get delivered, and the response coming back can be, surf fail or whatever, rather than silence.
Michael Abramson, so I heard 4 PVDs?
He's talking two external connections, and then the home, the regular home net, the sort of local address, and then the guest PVD. So the guest PVD is restricted.
But wouldn't you have one guest PVD per ISP?
Why? No,
But-
no. So the ISPs are public. There's no reason to. There's no reason to have a separate PVD per ISP based on whether you're on the guest LAN or the.
But isn't the whole idea here that you would have 2 distinct guest prefixes, one per ISP, announced on?
You would, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't be different PVDs.
But if
notionally
one ISP connection is mobile and the other one is LAN, and the one is metered and the one is not,
yeah,
then you would want to have 2 different PVDs, right? One per ISP for the guest LAN.
right, but it's the same PVD that's on the home LAN. Remember, PVDs are not routes. The PVDs are just information sources, right? Which includes a route, but it's not a route. So you're going to have a different prefix on the guest LAN than you have on the home LAN, right?
Yes, I understand that one.
Yeah. And so the guest LAN is going to be advertising the same PVD for ISP1 as the PVD for ISP1 that's advertised on the home LAN. The difference will be that the guest LAN can't get to the home LAN, but it can totally get to the outside. That's why you have a guest LAN.
I understand that, but if it's one PVD, but the different prefixes have different properties.
No, the properties are all the same. The properties for the home PVD on the home network and the properties on the guest network are the same, because you're only using that PVD to talk to the outside world. You're not using it to talk to the local network.
We seem to have a fundamental, different understanding.
Yeah, I'm not. Tim, do you have a theory as to why we're having this problem?
I think that what Michael's saying is that the administrative domain, the provisioning domain, is the same for the home net and the guest LAN. It's you, right?
No.
What I'm saying is that if ISP1 is metered and ISP2 is unmetered,
yes,
I will have 2 different prefixes on my guest LAN with 2 different prefix properties, so that the device can choose the unmetered one when it wants to do backups.
Okay.
And it uses the other one for.
I think that we are actually simply failing to communicate, because I'm not disagreeing with what you just said.
So how do you communicate these different properties if they're in the same PVD?
They're not. You've got 2 different connections. The 2 different connections are each a different PVD.
But you have.
So is this partially a perspective thing? Like, from your router's perspective, it has 4 networks. But so what is the view? How many PVDs does a guest device on the guest LAN see?
3.
It sees 3. It sees its own guest local network and 2 ISP uplinks.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's also what you want. Because they can choose which one they get to
But like internet connectivity with different properties, can that be one PVD?
It's not one.
No, he's saying from the guest device's perspective, those are 2 different PVDs. He's just saying there are only 4 PVDs from the perspective of the box that is providing the guest network.
Oh, okay. So the device connected to the
that was
network
good.
sees three PVDs.
Right, I mean, he's assuming he is not on Dave Thaler's theoretical device that connects to both.
Right. Yeah, so that was the whole way that this thing started was
The router is a non-theoretical device.
Yes,
Yeah.
the router
Well,
connects to both, but a random machine in the home, a random host in the home is going to be on guest or home and the 2 external PVDs.
Okay.
Most likely.
So
I mean, I guess there's
Perspective is an
nothing
amazing-
stopping a home machine that had the ability to connect to 2 Wi-Fi links from connecting to both of them. But I mean, there's little utility there.
okay, so I think that I'm done with my presentation unless anybody else has exciting questions or new problems to force on me. Thank you all.
Yeah, I mean, we're just, this document is not being proposed as a work item here. It's just, we're doing this work. We thought you might like to know about it presentation.
So this is a draft that Pete and I have in DMM about communicating prefix cost to mobile nodes. I've already presented this in 6-man, so I apologize if you're going to hear the same thing again. But I'll try to focus on the multiple provisioning and any related aspects to that. If we go to the next page. Okay, starting with, let's assume that an MN gets a IP prefix when it attaches to the network, and as it keeps moving further and further away from the router, it's going to incur further delays and more routing state that needs to be maintained in the network, and the MN also gets to experience more latency and so on. What we're proposing is that we can convey this as a cost in the router advertisement, and the MN can decide whether it wants to continue with that prefix or it's ready to move on to using a new prefix. So in that context, the MN, the first part of that is that the state of the network needs to be kept, and that's related to the transport resources and tunneling and so on to route the packets. And on the other hand, the network doesn't know the state of the connection flow that the MN is, for that particular application or set of applications. So the network cannot make a decision, to deprecate the address or something like that. It may be that one application may choose to agree with the costs because it wants to sustain that connection, and another application may be ready to move on to using the next prefix. So the proposal in this draft is to provide that cost to them. And a couple of notes: this is not about end-to-end jitter or latency, and it's not about layer 2 or link layer costs that affect the prefix. In the next couple of slides, I'll provide the motivation and then the change to the router advertisement. So starting with the figure on the left, which is the current mobile network architecture, we have at the very top the server, but then the packet data network gateway, and that's the first hop router in the current network, to which you have tunnels, and as the MN moves from one S gateway to the next, the tunnels are switched and so on. As we go on to a flatter architecture, maybe in 5G or whatever we call it, you have to get better latency and accommodate higher density of the networks. We likely have a flatter architecture, and with that, the chance that an MN moves from one router to the next as it keeps moving, that chance is increased. So it's in the context of the figure on the right that this extension is useful. I'll go. I mean, keep with this flatter architecture on the right. I'll go to the next page. Oh, sorry.
Hello, Ian Farah. So is the concept of this that every node that it goes through adds another point to another counter or something like that, so that it can say this is the number that it has traversed, or is there some kind of, it gets to the edge and then some arbitrary value is appended?
At this point, we were thinking of values that are relevant in a provisioning domain. I mean, but I've got questions on this in 6-man where the suggestion was that, at least one suggestion was that we have some guideline, so, a set of values that may make sense generally to everybody, and then each operator or so can customize it further and provision it further.
But isn't there, I mean, whatever, isn't there a case of saying, well, how does SGW, for example, know what weight to put on this? Because how does it know what path it's been through before it got here?
Right. Can I take that question on the next page?
Yeah, sure.
In association with those costs, and I think.
Yes, sir.
Because I'll try to answer it, and if I don't, then ask that again. So again, with that flatter architecture, I mean, we assume that MN1, which was attached first to the AR1, is now moved to the new location and is now attaching to AR2. IP address 1 is provided to MN1 and a tunnel is established between AR2 and AR1. In this case, the rough behavior is that for that connection, the AR2 is behaving like an S gateway, and the AR1 is a P gateway. That's roughly the case. So in the RA, AR2 now advertises IP1 with a high value for prefix cost and IP2 with a low value for prefix cost. And you can imagine that one application on MN1 may decide that it's ready to move on to IP2, and some other application may not be ready to.
Dave Taylor, clarifying question on the right picture. How many interfaces does MN1 have? Are those two IPs on the same interface, or are those two different interfaces?
I'm assuming that it's on the same interface.
Same interface.
Okay. But actually, we do not restrict it per se. So the extension itself is not tied to this one. In this example, it's tied to one interface.
Yeah, one question that I have on this, having thought about it since we saw your slides originally, is in a way, yes, it would be nice if MN1 could tell what the shortest path is to the person it's trying to reach. Okay, and this is, it would be nice if all nodes, forget all the mobile stuff. Okay, if all nodes could always pick the source IP address that's going to use the shortest path to get to who it wants to reach, that would be nice, right? But in order for this to work without MN1 becoming a BGP router, you have to have somebody else who's going to tell MN1 this information. But you're saying, like, for these links, it would have like a number like 4,000 for link 1 and a number like 500 for link 2, and but though, like 500 for link 2 is like, yes, it's 500 to reach mobile node 2, but it's still actually 4,000 if it wants to reach the server. So I'm not sure like where those numbers come from or who decides what they should be.
Right. I think I'll try to answer part of it at least. In terms of the end-to-end costs, I think there are other protocols which I assume TCP or Connex or some other way of eliminating the cost of congestion and so on, and we're not trying to
But
address
isn't
that.
the cost of the path based on who you're trying to reach?
Right, but then how to populate that would be rather complex because in this case, we're only assuming the cost from, AR1 to AR2, those are the additional costs. If it has to figure out all the costs of the way to the server, then it could be traversing multiple operator domains and so on, and that's a rather complex problem, and we didn't want to.
So excuse me, can I intercept here? So you got the previous, the cost from the beginning, from home. So how can you change when you visit the other place?
Right. And in this example, if you look at IP2, it's a short path and the prefix cost is low, while IP1 is marked as a higher cost, and that's easy for it to be computed. The values itself, yeah. Right, and that's a gap we have in the draft, and I understand that comment. We've got it a few times now, so we will make an attempt to, quantify those.
John, let me repeat my question. So I assume I understand the mobile case. So when you driving the car across the P gateway, you get a second prefix. But my question is, your first prefix from the home has a cost. When you visit the second or third or 100 station later, then how can you change the cost?
So I'm assuming that, okay, let me see if I understood your question first. Let's say that MN1 was attached to AR1, and in that case, it's in the same provisioning domain, and IP1 has a fixed cost equals low, whatever that value is.
Right, so AR1 says to MN1, right, the cost of your one link at that point is 200.
Right. And then it moves further away. There are tunnel costs, there are state costs of maintaining all of that.
Who tells MN1 that it has moved further away and that should be a different?
That's in the router advertisement. It doesn't,
the router.
It's in the router.
The router advertisement from the home to the host is very far. I mean, the cost will be changed.
The router advertisement in this case comes from AR2.
The AR2 is only for the second prefix.
It's for both.
For both.
Because he keeps getting his renewals.
Then I get confused.
Yeah, I have a couple questions that I think will help to decompose this. How many RAs does MN1 get on the one? MN1 has one interface, which you've described before in this example. Okay, how many RAs does he get?
One.
He gets a single RA from AR2, as opposed to one from AR1 and one from AR2. Okay, so there's only one RA, there's only one interface, there's only one PBD, right? Because the metrics aren't comparable unless they come from the same provisioning domain, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is actually in scope for this working group, but okay, now I forgot what my follow-up question was going to be, which is tied to Margaret's question.
Dave, while you remember that, while you think of the question, I'll also say that in the last slide, I have an example which may apply to MIF, and I'll bring that.
Oh, I know.
So the question is, how does it change?
I remember what my other question was now. But looking at you reminded me of what you said, so that did it. So Margaret, you were asking, what does it mean to have a cost of a prefix? Okay. And what I want to compare it with is the cost of the default route, right? We already have a mechanism for having, high and medium and low costs associated with the default route. So we say, is it a path to what, right? Well, we have a way of saying for any given route, we already have a 2-bit prefix preference mechanism. So I think that the only thing that this matters for is if you're talking about communication between two hosts on the same subnet prefix, because they don't have a route other than the prefix information option one.
Right.
And so I think that's the only value that I see here in specifying a prefix cost beyond what you can already do, which is doing it on a route information object basis, right? You can already do it in the default route and any particular route information object. The only value that I see in putting a cost in the prefix is if you want to have different costs for communicating between two different hosts on the same subnet prefix. In this scenario, does that actually happen, where MN1 can talk to somebody else directly on the same prefix and not go off to the server?
In the example here with MN1 talking to MN2.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
still
right,
going to
right.
AR2.
It's the greenish, bluish path there that's
Right.
labeled IP2 goes between two of them and say, that one would be slightly cheaper. So in your example here, MN1 is only on IP2, right? If MN2 was in exactly the same situation, right, then MN1 would say, well, now I got 2 ways to get to MN2. I have different IP addresses, and one of them would be less costly than the other because the link metric is lower or better or whatever.
Right. I mean, one of the things that the cost thing in the default gateway, we never really kind of defined what cost is, but there was at least some discussion of it might be whether or not the link is tariffed, which this has nothing to do with. And so it's kind of, we're using the word cost 2 different ways too.
Dave, I also wanted to add one more thing. I mean, if in this example I'm showing MN1 to MN2, but arguably it could also be the MN1 talking to a server, and there is a better route from AR2 to the server.
My point is you can already solve that without any new options, right? You use the route information option to do that, and you send a new metric in there. We've already got the capabilities of doing that that's in all the hosts. So.
I need to follow that, so I'll ask.
Yeah, you'll have to look at the route information option.
Yeah, there are 2 bits in the router advertisement that control the default route preference, and then in any route information option for any non-default route, there's another 2 bits in there, and those 2 bits say whether it's high, medium, or low.
Marco Liebscher, I just remember the discussion from the so I'm just wondering again if the cost is an indicator to the mobile node to take a decision when to deprecate an IP address or when to continue using it, right?
Right.
Or is it in case the mobile node has 2 addresses with different costs to take a decision which one to use?
The mobile node may have multiple applications. Some applications may be happy with, the higher cost because of other constraints. And other applications may want to switch over because it prefers or needs a lower latency or lower cost.
So I think the application just needs an IP address to communicate. So it could be solved pretty simplistic by means of having one address which is valid. So the other one may be deprecated or not used anymore. So indicating costs together with prefixes may complicate the whole thing.
So yeah, I think this question on deprecated addresses came up, and I think the case is, if in this example it looks like the 2-bit value seems okay, but if you have, let's say, 3 applications, and a deprecated address means the same information to all of those applications, whereas one application may want to continue while another one may not, based on the same value that's presented to it.
Okay.
All right, let's finish this up here. I think there's another slide.
Yeah, so this is the prefix cost sub-option, and it's using the draft, I think there's a newer version of it, 05. The prefix cost is a 16-bit unsigned number of the network. And I think that was it. The next slide is
Okay, Dave Taylor, based on your previous answers, I don't see how this works. So maybe you can elaborate, because in the example that you gave, there's one array, and it contains 2 prefix information options with different cost. How do you associate a prefix cost with which prefix it goes with?
I think that's in the prefix properties. Is that right, Joni? You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think this goes with the, and this is metadata associated with the prefix.
So are you going to do something inter AR prefix assignment? So you assign the home prefix from the home AR to the visiting AR. Is that what you want?
You can look at it that way, yes. I mean, basically the IP1 is belongs to AR1 in this example.
Right.
And it's now provided via AR2.
So that means you have to delegate this prefix from the AR1 to AR2.
Delegate or?
Yes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, one example, it could be using PMIP. We're not limiting the way it gets it, but it could be PMIP. It could be an SDN based.
So yeah, okay, so you are assuming the home is P gateway, the visiting is the serving gateway. Is that?
Yes, that's an example.
No, but I'm saying these both are P gateway. You have to do the inter P gateway.
So I think this is going to the DMM architecture where this is going to be the DMM architecture where the P gateway, S gateway kind of, in the example, if you just go back a couple of slides, I can say that. So in this case, the AR1, for IP1, it behaves as an S gateway and P gateway. So, okay, I'll just go to the very last slide. After, I mean, I hope I've already got some feedback, but the very last slide, the one after this, actually, I put as a backup slide, shows.
He wants you to go to another slide.
No, he wants you to after.
No, next slide. Oh, one more slide.
Right. So this is showing an example with multiple provisioning domains, and I thought that this may apply a bit more to the case in MIF. So just to go over the figure, 2 policy domains, domain 1 and domain 2, and they get configured with policies. I put X, Y, and Z in from domain 1 and ABC from domain 2. They're different domains, and the way that could be configured maybe via OMA DM or S14 or something like that from 3GPP. And then the routers advertise the cost, and there's a way to interpret those policies from the different domains.
Any further questions, feedback? Okay. All right, does anybody have anything else they want to share or say or anything before we call it quits? I think we're done here. Thank you very much.